Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the ordinary moments of history. Tonight, we turn our attention to something so mundane, so everyday, that it rarely finds its way into the grand narratives of empire and conquest. We're going to spend the next few hours exploring how Romans cleaned their clothes. Not the dramatic tale of Julius Caesar's conquests, not the political intrigue of the Senate, not the gladiatorial combats in the Colosseum, just laundry. The slow, methodical, somewhat tedious process of keeping tunics and togas presentably clean in the ancient world. Take a breath. Let it out slowly. Settle yourself into a comfortable position. Let the weight of your day begin to lift as we step back 2,000 years, to a time when doing the wash was an all-day affair, a community event, and occasionally a rather pungent experience. The year is 150 CE, though it could just as easily be 50 CE or 250 CE. The specifics of Roman laundry didn't change much over the centuries. The Roman Empire stretches from the misty shores of Britannia in the north to the sun-baked deserts of Egypt in the south, from the hills of Hispania in the west to the ancient cities of Syria in the east. In the heart of this vast empire, in countless cities and towns and rural villas, millions of people wear millions of garments. And all of those garments, eventually, inevitably, need to be cleaned. There's a comforting rhythm to this fact. No matter how grand the empire, no matter how impressive the aqueducts or the roads or the architecture, people still needed to wash their clothes. The emperor himself, draped in purple and gold, wore undergarments that absorbed sweat just like anyone else's. Those undergarments needed washing. A senator's toga, gleaming white as he stood in the forum, had been cleaned by someone somewhere, using techniques we're about to explore in careful detail. This is not a story of innovation and discovery. This is not a tale of heroism or dramatic reversals of fortune. This is simply the story of soap and water, scrubbing and drying, and the patient, repetitive work that kept the Roman world clothed in relative cleanliness. There will be no dramatic revelations here, no sudden plot twists, no moments of suspense. Just the gentle rhythm of an ancient routine, described in careful detail so that you might drift away while imagining the slow passage of a Roman washing day. Think about laundry in your own life for a moment. Perhaps you have a washing machine that does most of the work for you. You place dirty clothes inside, add detergent, press a button, and wait. 45 minutes later, the clothes are clean. Then into the dryer they go. Another 45 minutes, and they emerge warm and ready to fold. The whole process, from dirty to clean to dry, might take 2 hours of machine time, with perhaps 15 minutes of your actual labor. Loading, unloading, folding. Now imagine that same task without any machines, without manufactured detergent, without running water in your home, without electricity or gas to heat water. Imagine that every step requires manual labor. From fetching the water to heating it, to scrubbing each garment by hand, to wringing it out and hanging it to dry in the sun. Imagine that the entire process for a single load of laundry might take 6 or 8 hours of actual work, spread across a full day or even 2 days if the weather doesn't cooperate. That was the reality for Romans. For everyone in the Roman world, from the wealthiest households with dozens of slaves to the poorest families barely surviving, laundry was work, constant, unavoidable work. And yet, despite this difficulty, Romans were remarkably clean by ancient standards. They bathed regularly. Many visited public baths daily. They changed their undergarments frequently. They valued cleanliness, even though achieving it required so much effort. How did they do it? What techniques did they use? What materials? Who did the actual work? These are the questions we'll answer tonight, slowly and thoroughly, leaving no detail unexplored. Shall we begin? Let us start at the very beginning, with the clothes themselves. Before we can understand how Romans cleaned their garments, we should first understand what those garments were, what they were made of, how they were constructed, why they needed the particular cleaning methods that Romans employed. This foundation will help everything else make sense as we progress through the washing process. So settle in. Close your eyes if you wish. Let your mind wander back through time. Back to streets paved with stone, to houses built around open courtyards, to a world without machines or modern conveniences, where every necessary task required human hands and human effort. We have hours ahead of us, and we're in no hurry at all. Before we can understand how Romans cleaned their clothes, we should first understand what clothes they wore. So let us take our time here, moving slowly through the typical wardrobe of a Roman household, examining each garment in detail, understanding the fabrics, the construction, the way these clothes were worn, and why they accumulated dirt. The most fundamental garment, worn by nearly everyone regardless of social status, was the tunic. Picture a simple, loose-fitting garment, rather like a very long shirt or a short dress. The basic tunic was essentially a large rectangle of woven fabric, folded in half and sewn up the sides, with openings left for the arms and a hole cut for the head. Simple, functional, practical. The tunic typically fell to about the knees for men, though working men, laborers, farmers, slaves doing physical work, often wore theirs shorter, hitched up and belted at the waist so the hem came to mid-thigh. This gave them more freedom of movement for physical tasks. Women's tunics were longer, reaching to the ankles, providing the modesty that Roman society expected. Most tunics were made of wool, Roman wool. Let us pause here and think about that wool for a moment, because understanding the fabric helps us understand why it was cleaned the way it was. The wool came from sheep, of course, Roman sheep, grazing on hillsides throughout the empire. In the countryside of Italy, in the hills of Hispania, on the plains of Gaul, shepherds tended their flocks. These were not the same breeds of sheep we have today. Selective breeding has changed sheep considerably over the centuries, but they were sheep nonetheless, producing wool that could be harvested annually. In spring, when the weather warmed and the sheep no longer needed their full winter coats, they would be sheared. Imagine a spring day in rural Italy. The shepherd has gathered his flock in a pen. One by one, the sheep are caught and held still. Not easy, as sheep are surprisingly strong and remarkably opposed to being restrained, and sheared with iron scissors or shears. The shepherd works methodically, cutting close to the skin, but not so close as to nick the animal. The wool comes off in irregular pieces, some large, some small, all of it thick with lanolin, the natural oil that keeps sheep's wool waterproof. This raw wool, greasy and dirty, still carrying bits of grass and twigs and dust from the field, would be collected in large baskets. It had to be cleaned before it could be used. So it was washed, dumped into large vats of water. agitated to remove the worst of the dirt. This first washing removed some of the lanolin, but not all. Wool retains quite a bit of its natural oils even after washing, which is part of why it's such an effective insulator and why it resists water to some degree. After washing, the wool had to be dried. Spread out in the sun, perhaps, or hung over racks. Once dry, it was ready for the next stage, carding. This is the process of combing the wool fibers so they all lie in roughly the same direction. Romans used simple hand carders, flat paddles studded with bent iron teeth, rather like modern hairbrushes, but more aggressive. You'd take a clump of wool, place it on one carder, and brush it repeatedly with the other carder, the teeth catching and pulling the fibers, gradually aligning them. This was time-consuming work, but necessary. Well-carded wool spins into much better thread than uncarded wool. Now the wool was ready to be spun. Spinning, the process of twisting fibers into thread, was done with a drop spindle. This simple tool consists of a wooden shaft with a weight at the bottom. The spinner attaches a bit of already spun thread to the spindle, then draws out fibers from the mass of carded wool, allowing the spinning spindle to twist them into new thread. As thread is created, it's wound onto the spindle. The spinner's fingers must maintain just the right tension, drawing out the fibers steadily, allowing the twist to set properly. Too loose, and the thread is weak. Too tight, and it's hard to work with. This spinning was primarily women's work in Roman society. Women spun thread while sitting, while walking, while supervising children, while chatting with neighbors. The drop spindle was portable. You could carry your wool and your spindle with you and work on it anywhere. A skilled spinner could produce quite a bit of thread in a day, but it still took many days of spinning to create enough thread for a single tunic. The thread could be left its natural color, an off-white or grayish tone, depending on the sheep. Or it could be dyed. Dyeing was a specialized craft. Different colors required different materials, different techniques. For red, you might use madder root, which had to be harvested, dried, and then simmered with the wool thread to transfer its color. For blue, woad, a plant that had to be fermented in a complex process before it would yield its blue pigment. For purple, expensive, prestigious purple, you needed thousands of tiny sea snails crushed and processed to extract the precious dye. A truly purple garment was a sign of great wealth and status. But most tunics were undyed, or perhaps dyed in the cheaper, more common colors. The natural off-white of wool was perfectly acceptable for everyday wear. Once enough thread had been spun, and remember, this might be months of work for a single tunic, it was ready to be woven. Weaving was done on looms. The Roman loom was a vertical frame with warp threads, the structural threads, hanging down, held taut by clay or stone weights tied to their bottoms. The weaver would pass the weft thread back and forth horizontally, working from the top, creating fabric bit by bit. A skilled weaver could work steadily for hours, the shuttle carrying the weft thread flying back and forth with practiced rhythm. But even so, weaving a tunic's worth of fabric took days. The loom stood in the corner of a room, and the weaver returned to it whenever other tasks allowed, adding inch by inch to the growing fabric. Finally, after all this work, shearing, cleaning, carding, spinning, possibly dyeing, weaving, there was enough fabric for a tunic. The fabric was cut, though often tunics were woven to size, eliminating the need for cutting. The sides were sewn shut, leaving openings for the arms. A slit was cut for the neck. Perhaps the edges were hemmed for a neater finish. And there it was, a tunic. Think about all that work. Months of labor, from sheep to finished garment. And now, after wearing this tunic for a week, it's dirty. It smells of sweat. There's a stain on the front where soup was spilled during dinner. The hem is dusty from brushing against the ground. It needs to be cleaned. But here's the thing. That tunic represents months of work. You don't simply throw it away and make a new one. You clean it, carefully, and wear it again, and again, and again. A well-made tunic might last for years, if properly maintained. This is why cleaning methods mattered. The garment was valuable, not in gold or silver, but in the sheer amount of human labor it embodied. Cleaning needed to be effective enough to actually remove dirt and odors, but gentle enough not to damage the fabric or shorten its useful life. Now, let's consider the other garments in a Roman wardrobe. Over the tunic, a Roman citizen, someone with full citizenship rights, not a slave or foreigner, might wear a toga for formal occasions. The toga is perhaps the most iconic Roman garment. Yet most people today have little idea what it actually was or how it was worn. A toga was a large, semicircular piece of wool cloth. Very large. Imagine a piece of fabric, perhaps 15 feet long at its straight edge and 7 or 8 feet wide at its widest point. This massive piece of fabric was undyed, left in its natural off-white color, though ideally it would be bleached to a brighter white. The whiteness of your toga signaled respectability, cleanliness, status. Putting on a toga required help. You couldn't do it alone. The fabric had to be draped in a specific way. Over the left shoulder, wrapped around the back, brought under the right arm, then draped again over the left shoulder, creating a complex arrangement of folds and layers. Once properly arranged, you had to move carefully. Energetic movement could disrupt the draping, causing the whole thing to come undone. Romans wearing togas moved with deliberate dignity, in part because the garment itself demanded it. The toga was heavy, hot, and cumbersome. In daily life, most Romans didn't wear togas. They wore tunics. Togas were for public appearances, for conducting official business, for ceremonies. But when you did wear a toga, it needed to be clean and white. A dingy, yellowed toga suggested poverty or slovenliness. So togas required special care, special cleaning techniques, which we'll explore in detail later. Women didn't wear togas. Instead, a married woman of status wore a stola over her tunic. The stola was a long, pleated dress that draped from the shoulders to the feet. Over this, when going out, she might wear a palla, a rectangular shawl draped around the shoulders and arms, providing both warmth and modesty. Underneath everything, people wore undergarments, simple linen or wool garments worn next to the skin. These absorbed sweat more directly than the outer garments and therefore needed washing more frequently. There were also accessories to consider. A belt, often made of leather, worn around the waist of a tunic. A cloak for cold weather. Head coverings for women. And footwear, sandals or closed shoes, which might be made of leather and therefore required different cleaning methods than wool garments, though that's beyond our scope tonight. So there we have it, the basic Roman wardrobe. Tunics for everyone, togas for male citizens, stolas and pallas for women, undergarments for all and various accessories. Most of it made from wool, some from linen, rare items from expensive silk. And all of it eventually needed washing. The sweat of the human body, the dust of the streets, the occasional spill of food or wine, the general grime of daily life, all of this accumulated in the fabric, making it dirty, making it smell, making it socially unacceptable to wear without cleaning. Now that we understand what needed to be washed, we can begin to explore how the washing was actually done. But first, we need to consider the most fundamental requirement for washing anything: water. Where did Romans get their water? How did they transport it? How much water did washing require? These practical questions must be answered before we can proceed to the actual washing process. To wash anything, one needs water. This seems obvious, trivially obvious, but in the ancient world, obtaining water was not always as simple as turning on a tap. Water had to be sourced, transported, and often stored. Let us explore this in detail, because understanding the Roman water supply helps us understand both the possibilities and the limitations of their cleaning practices. Let us imagine ourselves in a Roman city. Not Rome itself, necessarily, though we could use the capital as our example. Instead, let's picture a medium-sized provincial city, perhaps Lugdunum in Gaul, or Emerita Augusta in Hispania, or Ephesus in Asia Minor. A prosperous place, home to perhaps 30 or 40,000 people, with all the infrastructure and amenities that Romans expected in a proper city. The most impressive aspect of this city's infrastructure is its aqueduct. Somewhere in the hills outside the city, perhaps 10 or 20 or even 50 miles away, there's a spring or river that provides fresh, clean water. From that source, a channel has been constructed, carefully engineered to maintain a gentle, continuous downward slope that carries water toward the city by the force of gravity alone. Think about that engineering for a moment. The aqueduct might run for miles, always maintaining its slope, never allowing the water to pool or stagnate. Where valleys interrupt the terrain, massive stone arches carry the water channel high above the ground. Where hills block the path, tunnels have been carved through solid rock, and the entire structure is lined with waterproof concrete, a Roman innovation that made all of this possible. The water flows continuously, day and night, year after year. When the aqueduct is first completed and the water is allowed to flow, there's probably a celebration. Officials and citizens gather to watch the first water arrive at the city's castellum, the distribution point where the aqueduct ends and the city's internal water system begins. The castellum is essentially a large stone tank where the aqueduct water collects before being divided into different channels. Some water is directed to public fountains. Some goes to the public baths, those temples of cleanliness and social interaction that are so central to Roman life. Some water, in wealthier cities, is piped directly to private homes and businesses. And some is allocated to commercial enterprises, including the Fullonaike, the professional laundries. But even in a city with an aqueduct, most households don't have private water connections. Running water in your home is a luxury, a marker of considerable wealth. For the typical household, water must be collected from public fountains. These fountains are positioned throughout the city, usually no more than a 5-minute walk from any home. Imagine a small plaza where 3 or 4 streets meet. In the center stands a stone fountain, perhaps 4 feet high, with water flowing constantly from a bronze or the stone spout. The water falls into a stone basin, and from there, overflows into a drain that carries the excess away to the city's sewers. Throughout the day, people come to this fountain. They come in the morning to collect water for cooking and drinking. They come again in the afternoon for more water, and perhaps again in the evening. The fountain is a social space as well as a functional one. Neighbors meet here, exchange news and gossip, discuss the affairs of the city while they wait their turn to fill their vessels. The vessels themselves are usually ceramic, amphorae, which are large jars with two handles and a pointed bottom, or smaller jugs that are easier to carry. Terracotta, fired clay, practical and relatively inexpensive. A typical water jug might hold 5 or 10 litres when full. That's a significant weight to carry. Water is heavy, about 1 kilogram per litre, so a full 10-litre jug weighs 10 kilograms plus the weight of the jug itself. That's 22 pounds or more, all needing to be carried home, probably balanced on the shoulder or held with both hands. For a household's water needs on laundry day, multiple trips to the fountain are necessary. Let's think about this practically. To wash a family's accumulated dirty clothing, say a week's worth of tunics and undergarments for 5 people, you might need 20 or 30 litres of water just for the initial washing plus another 20 or 30 litres for rinsing. That's 4 to 6 trips to the fountain, each trip involving carrying heavy jugs back home. An hour's work or more, just to collect the water. In a household with slaves, this task falls to them. The domina, the lady of the house, might send a slave to the fountain early in the morning before the day grows too hot. The slave makes repeated trips, bringing water back and pouring it into large storage vessels in the house. These storage vessels, dolia, large ceramic jars that might hold 50 or 100 litres, allow the household to maintain a reserve of water. In households without slaves, the water collection becomes a family task. Children might be sent to the fountain with smaller jugs. The wife makes trips, carrying what she can. Water collection becomes a routine part of daily life, a task that must be done regardless of other demands on time and energy. The quality of fountain water varies. Most aqueduct water is quite clean. The Romans were careful about their water sources, choosing springs and upper reaches of rivers where the water was fresh and pure. But by the time water reaches the fountain and sits in the basin, where birds might drink and dust might settle, it's perhaps not quite as pristine. Still, it's vastly better than drawing water from a polluted river or a stagnant pool. Now, let's consider a different scenario. A household in the countryside, far from any aqueduct. Here, the water situation is entirely different. Rural households might have their own wells. A well is essentially a deep hole dug down to the water table, the level underground where the earth is saturated with groundwater. Digging a well is difficult, dangerous work. You have to dig straight down, through soil and rock, until you reach water. This might be 20 feet, might be 40 feet, might be more. The walls of the well need to be reinforced as you dig, usually with stones stacked carefully to prevent collapse. It's work that takes weeks, work that might cost a rural family their savings to have done. But once complete, the well provides water for years or decades. Drawing water from a well requires different equipment than visiting a fountain. You need a rope and a bucket. The bucket is lowered into the well, allowed to fill with water, then hauled back up by pulling the rope hand over hand. If the well is deep, this hauling requires significant strength. Your arms burn with the effort. The rope, wet and heavy, is rough on your hands. But eventually the bucket emerges, water sloshing, and you empty it into your carrying vessel and start again. Some wells have a simple machine to make drawing water easier, a shaduf or a well sweep. This is a long beam balanced on a vertical post like a seesaw. On one end hangs the bucket. On the other end is a counterweight, a large stone. You pull down on the bucket end to lower it into the well, let it fill, then release. The counterweight helps lift the full bucket, making it easier to raise. It's still work, but less exhausting than pure arm strength. Other rural households might be near a spring, where water emerges naturally from the ground. Springs are wonderful sources of water. The water is usually very clean, filtered by its passage through rock and soil, and it's constantly replenishing itself. A household near a good spring is fortunate indeed. They might place a basin or trough at the spring to make water collection easier, or they might simply fill their vessels directly from the flow. And then there are those who must rely on rivers or streams. This is less ideal, as river water can be muddy, especially after rain, and it might be contaminated by waste from settlements upstream. But in the absence of better options, river water must suffice. You walk down to the riverbank with your vessels, fill them in the clearer water near the bank rather than the muddy center current, and carry them home. For laundry, some rural households take a different approach entirely. They do the washing right at the water source. If you live near a river or stream, why carry water home when you can carry the dirty clothes to the water? So on washing day, the women of the household gather up the dirty tunics and linens, place them in baskets, and walk to the riverbank. There, kneeling on the bank or wading into the shallows, they do the washing directly in the river. The water is right there, an unlimited supply. Dirty water flows away downstream. Fresh water constantly replaces it. This practice is common enough that in many places, certain stretches of riverbank become traditional washing sites. Large flat rocks in the shallows serve as scrubbing surfaces. The women of several households might gather there together, turning laundry into a social activity. They chat, exchange news, watch each other's children, all while working on the washing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We haven't yet discussed the actual washing process. We're still just collecting water, understanding where it comes from, and how much effort is required to have water available for cleaning. Let's return to our city household, where water from the fountain has been collected and poured into large basins. These basins are made of fired clay or carved from stone. They're substantial vessels, heavy and fixed in place. A washing basin might be 2 feet across and a foot deep, able to hold 20 or 30 liters of water. Some households have multiple basins, one for washing, one for rinsing. The water sits there waiting. It's cold. Aqueduct water comes from springs and remains quite cold year-round. In winter, it's painfully cold. In summer, it's refreshingly cool. For washing clothes, cold water actually works reasonably well with the right cleaning agents, which we'll discuss next. But it's hard on the hands, especially when you're scrubbing and wringing and your hands are submerged for hours. Some households heat water for laundry. This requires fuel, wood or charcoal, and a large pot that can be placed over a fire. Heating enough water for washing is time-consuming. The water must be brought to temperature gradually, which might take an hour or more depending on the amount of water and the size of the fire. Hot water is a luxury for laundry. used mainly in wealthy households or for particularly dirty items that need extra help getting clean. Most washing, most of the time, is done in cold or lukewarm water. Romans are practical people that they understand that clean clothes are important. But spending hours heating water for every washing is an inefficient use of time and fuel. So they've developed cleaning methods that work reasonably well with cold water. And this brings us to the next essential component of Roman laundry: the cleaning agents themselves. We have our water cold and clear in stone basins. We have our dirty clothes, wool and linen soiled with sweat and dust and daily wear. Now we need something to actually clean them. This is where Roman laundry takes a turn that might surprise modern sensibilities. Because the primary cleaning agent, the substance most commonly used to wash clothes in the Roman world, is not soap. It's something else entirely. Something produced by the human body itself. But we'll explore that in our next chapter. For now, rest here for a moment. With water collected and ready, clothes sorted and waiting, a washing day about to begin. Modern laundry detergent is a complex creation. It contains surfactants, which lower the surface tension of water and allow it to penetrate fabrics more easily. It contains enzymes, proteins, that break down specific types of stains. It has brightening agents, perfumes, softeners. All of this is carefully formulated in laboratories, tested and refined, packaged in colorful bottles with detailed instructions. Romans had nothing remotely so sophisticated, and yet they managed to clean their clothes quite effectively, using materials that were available to them, materials that addressed the fundamental chemistry of dirt and oils, even though they didn't understand that chemistry in scientific terms. Let us begin with the most important, most widely used cleaning agent in the Roman world: urine. Human urine, specifically, though animal urine could serve if necessary. If you find this unpleasant or distasteful to contemplate, you're not alone. Even Romans made jokes about it. But let us set aside our modern squeamishness and examine this substance practically, understanding why it was so valuable for cleaning. Urine is primarily water, about 95% water, in fact. But that remaining 5% contains various dissolved substances, and it's some of these substances that make urine useful for cleaning. The key component is urea, a nitrogen-containing compound that the human body produces as it breaks down proteins. When you eat meat, when you consume any protein, your body eventually produces urea as a waste product, and that urea is excreted in urine. Fresh urine, straight from the body, is not particularly effective as a cleaning agent. It's mostly just salty water. But give that urine time. Let it sit for several days in a sealed container, and a chemical transformation occurs. Bacteria that naturally occur in urine begin to break down the urea molecules split apart, producing ammonia. Ammonia. Perhaps you're familiar with ammonia as a modern cleaning product. It has a sharp, distinctive smell, the same smell that makes aged urine so pungent. That smell is your nose detecting ammonia molecules in the air, and your nose is right to find it unpleasant. Ammonia is a harsh substance, irritating to the eyes and throat in high concentrations. But ammonia is also remarkably effective at breaking down certain types of dirt and stains. Specifically, it excels at breaking down oils, fats, and proteins, precisely the sorts of substances that make clothing dirty. When you wear a wool tunic against your skin, The fabric gradually absorbs oils from your skin, proteins from your sweat, various organic compounds from your body. Over days of wear, these substances accumulate, making the fabric feel less fresh, making it smell of human body odor. Ammonia being an alkaline substance, meaning it has a high pH, reacts with these oils and proteins, breaking them down into smaller molecules that can more easily be rinsed away with water. It's basic chemistry, though Romans wouldn't have described it in those terms. They simply knew from centuries of practical experience that aged urine was effective for washing wool. The process of collecting urine for use in laundries was systematic and public. Throughout Roman cities, at street corners, and near public gathering places, large ceramic vessels were positioned for public use. These were not hidden away or disguised. They were simply there, available. A man walking through the city who felt the need to urinate might step to one of these vessels and use it, his contribution adding to the collective supply. There was no shame in this, no embarrassment. It was civic participation of a sort, contributing to the city's industrial processes. These collection vessels were periodically emptied by fullers, the professional laundry workers, or by their assistants. The urine would be transferred to larger storage containers at the Fullonica, the commercial laundry establishment, where it would be allowed to age. The aging process was essential. Fresh urine simply wouldn't work as well. It needed time for the bacterial action to convert urea into ammonia. Imagine, if you will, a Fullonica storage area. Large ceramic amphorae, sealed with stoppers, arranged along a wall line. Each contains urine at different stages of aging. The fuller knows which vessels are ready to use, perhaps by the date of collection written on a tag, or perhaps simply by experience and memory. The smell in this storage area is predictably strong, that sharp ammonia odor that makes your eyes water if you're not accustomed to it. When washing day arrives, a fuller would open one of these vessels, releasing a cloud of pungent vapor, and pour the aged urine into the washing vats. The smell intensifies. If you were standing nearby, you'd certainly notice it. But for the workers who spent their days in the Fullonica, this smell was simply part of the environment, as familiar as the smell of baking bread was to a baker. Now, urine wasn't the only cleaning agent Romans used. They also had soap, though Roman soap was quite different from the soap we know today. The word soap itself comes from a Roman source, though the etymology is unclear. The Romans called it sapo, and they learned about it relatively late in their history, possibly from Germanic tribes or Celtic peoples, who had been making soap for generations. Initially, Romans viewed soap with some suspicion. It was a foreign product, something barbarians used. But gradually, as they recognized its utility, soap production and use became common in the Roman world. Roman soap was made through a process called saponification, though again, Romans wouldn't have used that term. The process involves combining animal fats with ashes from wood fires. Let's break this down step by step, because understanding how soap is made helps us understand its properties and why it works for cleaning. First, you need fat. Beef, tallow, pig lard, sheep fat. Any animal fat will work, though some produce better soap than others. This fat is typically waste from butchering animals for meat. The fat is rendered, which means it's heated to melt it and separate out any bits of meat or connective tissue. What remains is pure liquid fat, which solidifies as it cools. Second, you need ashes. Not just any ashes, but specifically ashes from hardwood fires. When wood burns, it leaves behind minerals that were in the tree's structure. These ashes contain potassium compounds, potassium carbonate primarily. Though Romans didn't know the chemical composition, they simply knew that wood ashes, when mixed with water, created a caustic solution. To make soap, you take your rendered fat and heat it in a large pot. Then you add water and wood ashes. Or sometimes you add lye water, water that has been filtered through wood ashes, concentrating the potassium compounds. As this mixture is heated and stirred, a chemical reaction occurs. The alkaline ash water reacts with the fat, breaking it down and rearranging it at a molecular level. The result is soap, a substance that has properties of both the original fat and the original alkaline solution. This process takes time. You must maintain the heat, stir constantly to prevent scorching, and judge when the saponification is complete. Too little heating, and you just have a mixture of fat and ash water. Too much, and you can ruin the batch. It's a craft, learned through apprenticeship and experience. The soap that results from this process is not like modern bar soap. It's often soft and greasy, more like a paste than a solid bar. The color varies depending on the fats and ashes used. It might be brown, yellow, gray. The smell is not particularly pleasant. It carries odors from both the animal fat and the wood smoke. But it works. It cleans effectively because of its chemical structure, which allows it to bind with both water and oils, helping to lift oils and dirt from fabric so they can be rinsed away. Different soap makers had their own formulations and techniques, closely guarded as trade secrets. Some soap was harsh and crude, suitable mainly for industrial purposes, like washing wool before it was spun into thread. Other soap was more refined, gentle enough to use on finer fabrics, or even for bathing. The best soap makers could command good prices for their products, while cheap soap was available for those who couldn't afford better. For laundry purposes, soap was often used as a supplemental cleaning agent rather than the primary one. It was more expensive than aged urine, so it was reserved for special situations, particularly dirty garments, delicate fabrics that couldn't tolerate harsh treatment, or for households wealthy enough not to worry about the expense. Another cleaning substance that Romans used was natron. This naturally occurring mineral, composed primarily of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, was imported from Egypt, where it could be found in dried lake beds. Natron had been used in Egypt for thousands of years. The Egyptians used it in their mummification processes, and they also used it for cleaning and natron dissolves readily in water, creating an alkaline solution similar in some ways to the solution you'd get from wood ashes, but more concentrated and more consistent in its properties. When added to washing water, natron helps break down oils and organic material. It can also be mixed with a little water to create a paste, which can be applied directly to stubborn stains. The disadvantage of natron was its cost. Having to import it all the way from Egypt made it expensive, so it was typically used only in wealthier households or for particularly valuable garments. A toga that needed to be pristine white for an important public appearance might receive treatment with natron. An everyday tunic likely would not. Fuller's earth was yet another cleaning agent, quite different from the others we've discussed. Fuller's earth is a type of clay rich in aluminum magnesium silicate. It has remarkable absorptive properties. It can absorb many times its own weight in oils and liquids. This clay was found in various deposits throughout the Roman world. It would be collected, dried, and ground into a fine powder. When added to water and worked into damp wool, the clay particles penetrate into the fabric's fibers, absorbing oils and lifting away dirt. Unlike urine or soap or natron, fuller's earth doesn't dissolve. Instead, it works through mechanical and absorptive action. After treatment with fuller's earth, the fabric must be thoroughly rinsed to remove all the clay particles. But the result is often quite clean wool. Fuller's earth was particularly valued for treating new wool cloth. After wool was woven into fabric, it often needed cleaning to remove the natural lanolin and any dirt accumulated during the weaving process. Fuller's earth was gentle enough not to damage the fibers while still being effective at cleaning. So there we have the main cleaning agents of Roman laundry. Aged urine for its ammonia content, soap made from animal fats and wood ash, natron imported from Egypt, and fuller's earth with its absorptive clay particles. Different materials for different purposes, different situations, different budgets. The choice of cleaning agent depended on several factors. What fabric are you cleaning? Wool could tolerate harsh treatment. In fact, wool benefits from the ammonia in aged urine, which helps to soften the fibers and maintain the fabric's structure. Linen, being a plant fiber rather than an animal fiber, is somewhat more delicate and might be treated differently, perhaps with gentler soap rather than harsh urine. Silk, rare and precious, required the most careful handling and would never be subjected to the aggressive treatment used for everyday wool tunics. The degree of soiling mattered too. A lightly worn garment might simply be rinsed in water with a small amount of cleaning agent. A heavily soiled tunic, stained with food or wine or ground in dirt, needed more aggressive treatment, longer soaking, more vigorous scrubbing, perhaps multiple treatments with different cleaning agents. And of course, cost was always a consideration. Aged urine was essentially free, a waste product turned useful. Soap cost money, though not prohibitively so. Natron was expensive, reserved for special occasions. Fuller's earth fell somewhere in the middle, affordable for occasional use, but not the everyday choice for most households. It's worth pausing here to note something important. Romans didn't understand the chemistry behind these cleaning methods. They didn't know about ammonia molecules or saponification reactions, or the absorptive properties of clay at a molecular level. But they didn't need to understand the chemistry. They had centuries of practical experience that told them what worked. They knew that aged urine cleaned wool effectively. They knew that soap helped lift oils from fabric. They knew that fuller's earth left cloth cleaner than it had been. This empirical knowledge, gained through trial and error and passed down through generations, was entirely sufficient. Sometimes we modern people forget that you don't need to understand why something works in order to use it effectively. The Roman fuller treading wool in a vat of urine water didn't need a chemistry degree. He just needed to know that if he did this work, the wool would come out clean. And it did come out clean. Perhaps not by modern standards. We would find many Roman garments less than perfectly clean if we examined them closely. But by the standards of their time, in a world without synthetic detergents or washing machines, Romans achieved remarkable cleanliness through these simple, natural cleaning agents. Now, finally, we are ready to proceed to the actual washing process. We have our understanding of Roman clothing, our water collected and ready, our cleaning agents prepared. It's time to actually wash some clothes. But as we'll see, this process varies considerably depending on where and how the washing is done. Let us first observe a washing day in a typical Roman household, where the work is done by family members and household slaves, using the equipment and materials available in a private home. Not all Roman laundry was done by professionals. Many households, particularly those of modest means or those in rural areas far from commercial laundries, did their own washing. This domestic laundry was typically the work of women, the wife in poorer households, female slaves in wealthier ones, sometimes with children helping as they were able. Let us step inside a typical Roman house on washing day and observe the process from beginning to end. This is a respectable household, neither wealthy nor poor, located in a provincial city somewhere in the empire. The house is organized around an atrium, that characteristic Roman courtyard open to the sky, with a pool in the center to collect rainwater. Around this central space are arranged the various rooms of the house, sleeping chambers for the family, a dining room for meals and entertaining, a kitchen area, perhaps a small garden at the rear. It's not a grand house, but it's comfortable. Home to a family of 6, the paterfamilias and his wife, their 3 children, and 1 household slave who helps with the heavy work. The accumulation of dirty laundry has reached a point where washing can no longer be postponed. Several tunics have been worn and set aside. Undergarments have piled up. Household linens need attention. The wife, let's call her Lucia, though of course this could be any Roman woman in any Roman household, has been putting this off for a week or more. Because washing is demanding work, time-consuming and tiring. But it must be done. Lucia wakes early before the summer sun grows hot. She rouses the household slave, a young woman named Galla, and together they begin preparations. The first task is water collection. Galla picks up 2 large ceramic jugs and heads out to the nearest public fountain, 3 streets away. She makes this journey 4 times, carrying full jugs back each time, pouring the water into the large washing basin in the courtyard. This takes the better part of an hour, her shoulders aching from the weight by the 4th trip. While Galla collects water, Lucia sorts through the pile of dirty clothing. She separates the items that are merely sweaty and dusty from those that are truly soiled. A tunic with a wine stain on the front, another with mud splattered on the hem, her husband's undergarment that has yellowed with accumulated sweat. These heavily soiled items will need special attention. From a dark corner of the house, Lucia fetches a sealed amphora. Inside is aged urine collected from the household over the past 2 weeks and left to ferment. She unseals the vessel, and immediately the sharp smell of ammonia fills the air. It's unpleasant, certainly, but Lucia is accustomed to it. This is how washing is done. This is how her mother did it, and her grandmother before that. She pours a generous amount of this aged urine into the water basin. The smell intensifies. If you were standing in that courtyard, your eyes would water slightly from the ammonia fumes. But for Lucia and Galla, this is simply the smell of washing day. The first tunic is placed in the basin, pushed down under the surface of the cleaning solution. The wool resists water at first. Those natural lanolin oils that remain in the fabric make it somewhat water repellent. But gradually, the fabric becomes saturated, growing heavy as it absorbs the liquid. A second tunic joins the first, then a third. The items are left to soak, the cleaning solution beginning its chemical work, the ammonia breaking down the oils and proteins that have accumulated in the fabric during wear. While these garments soak, perhaps for half an hour, perhaps for a full hour, Lucia and Gala prepare for the next stages of the work. A heavy wooden paddle is brought out from storage. This will be used for stirring the clothes, for beating them against the basin to help work the cleaning solution through the fibers. A flat wooden board is positioned near the basin, one end propped up slightly so it tilts at an angle. This board will serve as a scrubbing surface. The sun climbs higher. The courtyard grows warmer. Lucia's children emerge from their sleeping chambers, and she sends them away to play in the garden, warning them not to interfere with the washing work. Her husband leaves for the forum, where he conducts his business. The house grows quiet except for the sounds of the washing. After the soaking period, the real work begins. Gala reaches into the basin and pulls out the first tunic. It's heavy now, waterlogged, and as she lifts it, cleaning solution streams from it, splashing back into the basin. She spreads the tunic out on the wooden scrubbing board, arranging it so the dirtiest parts are most accessible. Now comes the scrubbing. Gala leans her weight into the task, pushing the wet fabric back and forth against the board. The board's rough surface catches the fabric, helping to work the cleaning solution through the weave, helping to loosen dirt from between the fibers. This is hard physical work. It requires strength in the arms and shoulders, endurance to keep going. The rhythmic sound fills the courtyard, slap, 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 as the wet wool is pushed repeatedly against the wooden board. Lucia joins her, working on a second tunic. Together they scrub, their movements synchronized by long practice, by years of doing this work together. Their hands grow red from the work, from the constant wetness, from the alkalinity of the cleaning solution. The urine solution is harsh on skin. Not dangerous exactly, but not pleasant either. It dries the skin, makes it rough and chapped. By the end of the washing day, their hands will be sore. For the wine-stained tunic, Lucia decides to use a bit of soap. She keeps a small amount on hand, purchased from a soap maker in the marketplace, saved for situations like this. She rubs the soap directly onto the stain, working it in with her fingers, then scrubs that area extra vigorously. Gradually, the stain begins to fade. Not completely. Wine stains are stubborn, but it's much less noticeable than before. Each garment receives several minutes of scrubbing attention. The tunics that are only lightly soiled might need 5 minutes of work. The heavily soiled items might receive 10 or 15 minutes of scrubbing, their fabrics being worked repeatedly against the board, every section receiving attention. Once a garment has been scrubbed, it's time for rinsing. But the water in the washing basin is now quite dirty, cloudy with dissolved oils and dirt. It's no good for rinsing. So Gala empties the dirty water, carrying the heavy basin to the house's drain, pouring out the grey, murky liquid, watching it flow away into the city's sewage system. Then she makes several more trips to the fountain, bringing back fresh, clean water, refilling the basin for rinsing. Each washed garment is dunked into this clean water, swirled around, lifted and examined. Is it clean? Are all the soap residues gone? Usually, one rinse is not enough. The first rinse water quickly becomes cloudy as cleaning solution and loosened dirt wash out of the fabric. This water must be discarded and replaced with fresh water for a second rinse. Sometimes a third rinse is necessary. Between each rinse, the garment must be wrung out. This is surprisingly difficult work. Wool, when thoroughly saturated with raw water, becomes remarkably heavy. A single wet tunic might weigh 10 pounds or more. To wring it out, you must twist it, compressing the fabric to squeeze out the water. This requires strength in the hands and wrists, and it's hard on the joints. Lucia and Gala work together on the larger items, each taking an end, twisting in opposite directions, their muscles straining as they squeeze out as much water as possible. The work continues through the morning into the afternoon. Tunic after tunic, undergarment after undergarment, each one soaked, scrubbed, rinsed multiple times, wrung out. The pile of dirty laundry gradually transforms into a pile of clean, wet laundry. The sun moves across the sky. Lucia and Gala take short breaks when they can, drinking watered wine, eating bread and cheese, resting their aching hands and backs. Finally, late in the afternoon, the last garment has been washed and rinsed. Both women are tired. Their backs hurt from bending over the basin and the scrubbing board. Their hands are sore, the skin wrinkled from hours of being wet. Their arms ache from wringing heavy, waterlogged wool. But the work is done. The clothes are clean. Now comes the drying, which is simpler, but still requires attention. Lucia and Gala carry the wet laundry to the garden at the rear of the house. Here, ropes have been strung between posts for this purpose. They drape the tunics over these ropes, arranging them so air can circulate around them. Some items they spread flat on bushes in the garden, taking advantage of the sun's warmth and the breeze that passes through the garden. The drying will take hours, perhaps all night if the evening is humid. By tomorrow morning, most items should be dry, ready to be folded and put away. But that's tomorrow's task. For now, Lucia and Gala have done what they needed to do. The laundry is washed. This is the reality of domestic laundry in the Roman world. It's work that must be done regularly, week after week, month after month, year after year. It's work that consumes hours of time and considerable physical effort. It's work that falls primarily on women and slaves, people whose labor often goes unrecorded in the historical sources we have from the ancient world. And yet, without this work, the Roman standard of cleanliness could not be maintained. Every clean tunic worn in the forum, every fresh undergarment, every household linen, all of it required someone's labor. The grand public life of Rome, the political speeches and the business dealings and the social interactions, all of this was made possible in part by the invisible work of washing done by women like Lucia and Gala in private households across the empire. But domestic washing, while common, was not the only way laundry was done in the Roman world. For those who could afford it, and for certain types of garments that required special treatment, there were professional alternatives. Let us now visit a Folonica, a commercial laundry establishment, where washing was done on a much larger scale using specialized equipment and techniques. The Folonica was one of the most essential businesses in any Roman city of significant size. This commercial establishment served multiple functions: cleaning clothes for customers who brought in their dirty laundry, preparing newly woven wool cloth for use or sale, brightening and whitening togas that had grown dingy with wear. The Folonica was where the specialized craft of fooling, a process that gave these establishments their name, was practiced. Let us enter a Folonica in Pompeii. We're fortunate to know considerable detail about these establishments because several were preserved, frozen in time, when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. Archaeologists have excavated these buildings, studied their layout, reconstructed their operations. We can walk through these spaces with reasonable confidence that we're seeing them more or less as they actually functioned. We approach from the street. The Pholonikus entrance is marked by a simple sign, perhaps a painted image showing the work that's done within, or simply the name of the establishment. We step through the doorway, moving from the bright sunlight and noise of the street into the dimmer, enclosed space of the work area. The first thing that strikes you is the smell. It's a complex aroma, layered and intense. There's the sharp, acrid scent of ammonia from aged urine, strong enough to make your eyes water if you're not accustomed to it. Underneath that, the wet wool smell, thick and animal-like. A hint of sulfur from the whitening process. Wood smoke from fires used for heating water. And underlying everything, the general smell of damp stone, wet fabric, and human bodies engaged in physical labor. If you're sensitive to odors, you might find it overwhelming. But for the workers here, this smell is simply the smell of their workplace, as familiar as the smell of fresh bread is to a baker. The main workroom is large, perhaps 30 feet square, with a high ceiling that helps ventilate the space. The walls are plastered and painted, though the lower portions are stained and marked from years of wet fabric being leaned against them. The floor is stone, sloping slightly toward drains in the corners where water can run off into the city's sewage system. Around the walls of this room are several large basins or vats, each about 3 feet across and perhaps 2 feet deep. These are the treading vats, essential equipment for the fulling process. They're set into the floor at a level that brings their rims to about knee height, making them easy to step into, but still deep enough to hold a substantial amount of liquid. In several of these vats, work is already in progress. Let us observe closely. In the nearest vat, there's a mixture of water and aged urine. And standing in this mixture, barefoot, are 2 workers. They're both men, both young and strong. This work requires physical strength and endurance. They're wearing simple tunic that they've kilted up and tied at the waist to keep the hems out of the liquid. Beneath their feet, submerged in the cleaning solution, are pieces of wool cloth or wool garments. And the workers are treading, dancing in a way, lifting one foot and stomping down, then lifting the other foot and stomping down. The rhythm is steady, almost hypnotic. Step, stomp, step, stomp. Their weight compresses the wool beneath their feet, forcing the cleaning solution through every fiber, working out dirt and oils through this combination of chemical action and mechanical pressure. This is hard, monotonous work. Imagine standing in a knee-deep pool of liquid for hours, constantly shifting your weight, stomping repeatedly. Your legs grow tired. Your calves and thighs burn with the effort. The liquid itself is not pleasant to stand in. The ammonia is harsh on skin, and prolonged exposure causes irritation and drying. But this treading method is highly effective. The weight of a human body, the constant movement, the thorough working of the fabric, it all combines to produce remarkably clean wool. The workers tread for perhaps an hour on each batch of cloth, sometimes longer for particularly dirty items. They might take turns, one treading while the other rests, then switching positions. Or they might work together, their treading synchronized, their movements coordinated through long practice. In another vat across the room, a different worker is engaged in the same task, but alone. He treads steadily, his feet moving in that practiced rhythm, his attention perhaps elsewhere, thinking about his evening meal, or his family, or nothing in particular. The work doesn't require much mental engagement once you've learned the technique. Your body does the work, while your mind wanders. Around the edges of the room, other workers are engaged in different tasks. Near one wall, a man is scrubbing a toga on a large wooden board, much like the scrubbing we observed in the domestic washing, but on a larger scale. He leans his full weight into the work, pushing the fabric back and forth vigorously. Near him, a large paddle hangs on the wall. This tool is used for stirring and beating clothes in the washing vats, helping to agitate the fabric and work the cleaning solution through it. In one corner, there's a large press, a substantial piece of equipment made of heavy timber. This is a screw press, similar in principle to presses used for making olive oil or wine. But here, it's used for pressing water out of washed cloth. A stack of damp wool garments is placed between two thick boards, and the screw is turned, slowly increasing the pressure. Water squeezes out, running down channels cut into the lower board, dripping into a basin below. This pressing removes far more water than wringing by hand could achieve, making the subsequent drying process much faster. Near the press, a worker is operating it, turning the screw with a long wooden handle, gradually increasing the pressure on the cloth between the boards. The screw creaks and groans with the effort. Water streams out. Once sufficient pressure has been applied, the screw is reversed, the pressure released, and the pressed cloth is removed, considerably drier than it was before pressing. The Folonika is a busy place. Multiple processes are happening simultaneously. Some workers are treading in the vats. Others are scrubbing on boards. Someone is rinsing finished items in clean water. Someone else is wringing out rinsed cloth or feeding it into the press. There's a constant low hum of activity. The splash of water, the slap of fabric being beaten, voices calling to each other across the room, the creaking of the press. In one corner, away from the main washing area, there's a different kind of operation in progress, the whitening process. This is perhaps the most distinctive and specialized aspect of the Fulonika's work. A large, dome-shaped structure dominates this corner of the room. It's built of brick or stone, perhaps 6 feet tall, hollow inside. This is the sulfur bleaching chamber. At the bottom of this dome, there's a small opening where sulfur can be placed and ignited. Above, inside the dome, there's a framework where garments can be hung. The process works like this. Clean wool garments, typically togas or other items that need to be brilliantly white, are hung on the framework inside the dome. The opening at the bottom is sealed, and sulfur is ignited inside. As the sulfur burns, it produces sulfur dioxide fumes. These fumes rise, filling the dome, permeating the hanging garments. The sulfur dioxide has a bleaching effect, breaking down the yellowish compounds that naturally develop in wool, leaving the fabric whiter and brighter. The process requires careful judgment. Too little exposure, and the whitening effect is insufficient. Too much, and the sulfur fumes can actually damage the wool fibers, weakening them and shortening the garment's useful life. An experienced fuller develops a sense for the right amount of treatment, judging by the initial color of the fabric and the strength of the bleaching solution. But there's a problem with this process. Someone has to retrieve the garments from inside the sulfur chamber once the bleaching is complete. This means opening the dome while it's still full of sulfur dioxide fumes. The worker assigned to this task, often the youngest, least experienced worker, the one with least seniority, and therefore least ability to refuse unpleasant tasks, must reach inside, holding his breath, eyes watering from the fumes, and quickly pull out the treated garments. It's an unpleasant job, even a dangerous one. Breathing sulfur dioxide is harmful. It irritates the throat and lungs. Workers who regularly handle this task often develop chronic coughs and respiratory problems. But this is how togas are made brilliantly white, and Roman society demands those gleaming white togas. So the work continues. Once garments have been washed, perhaps whitened, they move to the finishing stages. The surface of wool fabric, after all the washing and treading and chemical treatment, often has loose fibers standing up from the surface, giving it a fuzzy texture. To create a smooth, professional finish, this fuzz must be removed. This is done with teasels. These are the dried seed heads of teasel plants, covered with small, hooked spines. A worker takes a teasel and carefully brushes it over the fabric surface. The hooks catch and remove the loose fibers without damaging the underlying weave. It's delicate work, requiring a light touch and attention to detail. Brush too hard, and you can damage the fabric. Brush too lightly, and the loose fibers remain. For the finest garments, there's an additional step after teaseling, shearing. Small sharp scissors or specialized shears are used to carefully trim any remaining surface fuzz, creating an even smoother finish. This is highly skilled work. The shearer must cut very close to the surface of the fabric without actually cutting into the fabric itself. It requires good eyesight, steady hands, and years of practice. Finally, finished garments are folded, and the Forlonicus workers must keep careful track of which garment belongs to which customer. There might be dozens of togas in various stages of processing at any given time. Mix them up, and you have unhappy customers. So some system of marking or organization is essential. Perhaps temporary labels attached to each garment, or perhaps designated areas where each customer's items are stored. Customers typically send a slave to the Forlonica to drop off dirty laundry and pick up cleaned items. A wealthy household might have a regular schedule. Drop off every third day, pick up the items that were dropped off the previous week. The Forlonica becomes part of the household's routine, an essential service that makes civilized life possible. The economics of the Forlonica vary by establishment. A busy Forlonica in a major city with a good reputation and wealthy clientele can be quite profitable. The owner, the Dominus Forlonite, might employ a dozen or more workers, processing hundreds of garments each week. But even a profitable Forlonica is a business of relatively low social status. The work itself, involving urine and harsh chemicals and physical labor, carries a stigma. The fuller might become comfortable, even wealthy, but he'll likely never achieve high social status, never be invited to dine with senators or appointed to public office. And yet, the fuller's work is essential. Without the Forlonica, the Roman standard of cleanliness, particularly that gleaming white toga that signals citizenship and respectability, would be impossible to maintain. The contrast is striking. Necessary work that is simultaneously essential and denigrated, valued in practice, but looked down upon in theory. As we leave the Follonica, stepping back out into the street, the sounds and smells of the establishment fade behind us. But throughout the city, in multiple Folonices scattered in different neighborhoods, this same work continues. Day after day, year after year, these establishments process the laundry of Rome, transforming dirty garments into clean ones, maintaining the appearance of civilization. The washed garments, whether cleaned at home or at the Follonica, now face one final requirement before they can be worn again: they must be dried. This seemingly simple step has its own complexities and challenges, which we'll explore next. Whether washed at home or at the Follonica, all clean laundry faces the same fundamental challenge. The garments are wet, heavy with absorbed water, and they must be dried before they can be worn again or returned to storage. This drying process, while seemingly straightforward, actually involves considerable practical difficulty and requires patience. In a private household, drying is typically done in the most available sunny space. In good weather, this might be the garden at the rear of the house. Lucia and Gela, whom we observed during their washing day, have carried their basket of clean, wet laundry to this garden. The garden is small but pleasant. A few fruit trees, some herbs growing in clay pots, a small grape arbor providing shade. Between two posts, ropes have been strung specifically for drying laundry. The women drape each tunic piece over these ropes, arranging the garments so they hang evenly, so air can circulate around them. A wet wool tunic is remarkably heavy, perhaps 10 pounds or more when fully saturated. The weight makes the rope sag slightly. Lucia adjusts the positioning, making sure no garment is bunched up, which would prevent even drying. Some items they spread flat rather than hanging them. A child's small tunic might be laid across a bush, using the plant's branches as a natural drying rack. Undergarments might be spread on the ground in a sunny spot, weighted at the corners with small stones to keep them from being blown away by the wind. And now comes the waiting. Drying is not a quick process. On a warm, dry summer day, with good sun and a gentle breeze, a thin linen tunic might be dry in 3 or 4 hours. So, a thicker wool garment takes longer, 6 to 8 hours, perhaps more. If the day is humid, or if it's winter and the sun is weaker, drying might take a full day, or even longer. The household must monitor the drying laundry. If clouds roll in, threatening rain, someone must quickly gather up the clothes and bring them inside, perhaps to finish drying near the hearth. If the wind picks up, light items might be blown from their positions and need to be rearranged. If birds fly overhead, and birds have no respect for clean laundry, their droppings can soil a freshly washed garment, requiring spot cleaning or even rewashing. Children are sometimes assigned the task of watching the drying clothes, making sure they dry evenly, turning them occasionally to expose all surfaces to the sun and air. It's a boring task, but necessary. A child might sit in the garden with the laundry, occasionally standing to flip a tunic or rearrange a garment, otherwise occupying themselves with small toys or games. By evening, most of the laundry is dry, or at least dry enough to bring inside for final drying overnight. The items are gathered up, now much lighter than they were when wet, though wool retains a slight dampness that will take until morning to fully dissipate. In the Follonica, drying is a more organized operation, though the basic principles remain the same. Many Follonici have dedicated drying areas. The building might have a flat roof, accessible by an internal stairway, where dozens of garments can be spread out in the sun. Racks and frames provide additional drying space. On a busy day, the Folonika's roof might be covered with white togas and colored tunics, all drying in the Mediterranean sun. The advantage for the Folonika is scale and efficiency. They can dry many garments at once. They have workers whose job includes monitoring the drying process, bringing items in if weather threatens, rotating garments to ensure even drying. And because this is their business, they've optimized the process through long experience. Some Folonaise even have indoor drying rooms for use in bad weather or winter. These rooms might be located near the establishment's fires or hypercaust system, if it has underfloor heating, taking advantage of warmth to speed drying. The air in these rooms is warm and dry, and carefully arranged racks allow for air circulation around hanging garments. Drying still takes hours, but it's somewhat faster than air drying in cool, humid conditions. Once garments are fully dry, they require some finishing touches before they're ready to be worn or returned to customers. The drying process, especially sun drying, can leave fabric somewhat stiff and wrinkled. This needs to be addressed. For wrinkle removal, Romans don't have irons in the modern sense, but they have alternatives. A smooth, flat stone, perhaps river stone worn smooth by water, or a purpose-cut stone with a handle, can be used as a pressing tool. The stone might be gently warmed, not hot, which would risk burning the wool, and then press against the fabric, smoothing out wrinkles and creases. This requires a firm, flat surface to work on and patient, careful effort. For fine garments receiving the fullest treatment, fullers might use a more elaborate pressing technique. The garment is laid flat on a pressing board, and a heavy weight is placed on top. Perhaps another board with stones stacked on it, or perhaps using the same screw press employed earlier for removing water. The pressure, applied evenly over time, smooths the fabric. This isn't as effective as modern pressing, but it helps. Some wrinkles are simply accepted as inevitable, especially for everyday garments. A working man's tunic doesn't need to be perfectly smooth, but a senator's toga, worn for public appearances, needs to look its best. So these prestigious garments receive careful finishing attention. Once dried and pressed, garments need to be stored properly until they're denuded again. This storage is important for maintaining cleanliness and protecting the fabric from damage. Moths are a particular concern. Clothes moths, small insects whose larvae feed on wool, can destroy garments if left unchecked. A tunic stored carelessly for a summer might be full of small holes by autumn. Romans are well aware of this problem and take steps to prevent it. The primary defense against moths is aromatic herbs. Lavender, with its pleasant smell and moth-repelling properties, is a common choice. After a tunic is cleaned and dried, it might be folded and laid in a wooden chest with sachets of dried lavender scattered around it. Cedar wood, which naturally repels moths, is valued for storage chests. Wormwood, another herb with moth-repelling properties, might also be used, though its smell is less pleasant than lavender. Folding itself is a skill, especially for large, unwieldy garments like togas. The toga must be folded lengthwise first, bringing the two ends of the semicircle together. Then it's folded again, and perhaps once more, until it forms a manageable rectangular package. Careful folding reduces wrinkles and makes efficient use of storage space. Wealthier households have dedicated storage rooms or large wooden chests for clean clothing. Each family member might have their own chest, or garments might be organized by type. The storage area is kept dry. Dampness encourages mildew, which can ruin wool. It's kept dark, as direct sunlight can fade dyed fabrics over time. It's kept secure, protecting valuable garments from theft or damage. Poorer households have less elaborate storage solutions. Clean clothes might be hung on wall pegs, or folded and stacked on a shelf, or kept in a basket. The important thing is that they're kept separated from dirty laundry and protected as much as possible from dust, insects, and damage. And so, finally, the laundry cycle is complete. From dirty to clean, from wet to dry, from rumpled to pressed, from washing to storage. The garments are ready to be worn again. And in a few days or a week, they will be worn. And they'll become dirty again, and the entire process will need to be repeated. This is the fundamental rhythm of Roman laundry. An endless cycle of washing and drying and storing, week after week, month after month, year after year. There's no escaping it. As long as people wear clothes, those clothes need cleaning. And in the ancient world, without modern conveniences, that cleaning requires time, effort, and patient labor. Let us spend a few final minutes considering what all this effort meant in the broader context of Roman society. We've spent hours now exploring the details of Roman laundry, the collection of water, the preparation of cleaning agents, the scrubbing and treading and rinsing, the drying and finishing and storage. These technical details are important for understanding how the work was actually done. But let us step back now and consider what this work meant in the larger context of Roman society. Laundry work was almost universally the labor of those with the least power and status. In private households, it was done by women, the wife and daughters in households without slaves, female slaves in wealthier homes. In commercial laundries, the workers were slaves or poor free persons with few other employment options. This was not work that conferred prestige or status. It was work that had to be done, work that society relied upon, but work that society simultaneously looked down upon. The fuller, despite providing an essential service, was often the subject of jokes and mockery in Roman literature. The smell of the forlonica, the use of urine, the general association with waste and dirty things, all of this made fullers objects of humor and occasional contempt. And yet, without fullers, the Roman ideal of the pristine white toga would have been impossible to achieve. The senator striding through the forum in his gleaming white toga owed his impressive appearance to workers standing barefoot in vats of urine, treading wool for hours. This contradiction, essential but denigrated work, is not unique to Rome. We see it in many societies, including our own. The people who do the necessary maintenance work of society, who handle waste, who clean, who do the physically demanding and sometimes unpleasant labor that keeps everything running. These people are often undervalued, despite the importance of their work. In Rome, this contradiction was visible in law and custom. The Emperor Vespasian, always practical and interested in revenue, placed a tax on the collection of urine for use in forlonicae. When his son Titus complained about the indignity of taxing such a disgusting substance, Vespasian supposedly held up a gold coin and said, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't smell. The phrase has endured. Money derived from any source spends just as well as money from any other source. But underlying this practical wisdom is an acknowledgement that some work is considered dirty, undignified, even though it produces economic value. For the workers themselves, for people like Gala, the household slave, or the unnamed fullers treading in vats, this work was simply their daily reality. They likely didn't spend much time philosophizing about the social status of laundry work. They had clothes to wash, work to do, and they did it because they had no choice or because it was the best option available to them. The amount of labor involved in keeping a household's or a city's clothing clean was substantial. If we imagine a Roman city of 40,000 people, with perhaps 10,000 households of varying sizes, and each household doing laundry every week or two, that represents an enormous collective expenditure of time and effort. Thousands of hours each week, hundreds of thousands of hours each year spent on the repetitive work of washing and drying and storing clothing. This labor was largely invisible in the sense that it happened in private courtyards, in commercial establishments on side streets, away from the grand public spaces where Roman history was made. The speeches in the forum, the sacrifices at the temples, the business dealings in the marketplace, these are what our historical sources mostly record. But underneath all of this public life was an infrastructure of private domestic work that made it all possible. The clean tunic worn by a merchant conducting business, the spotless toga worn by a patron receiving his clients, the fresh undergarments, the clean household linens, the maintained appearance of respectability and cleanliness, all of this required someone's labor. And that someone was usually a woman or a slave or a poor worker in a fullonica, doing work that was necessary but undervalued. As the Roman Empire aged and eventually declined, these laundry practices continued the largely unchanged. The techniques we've described, washing in aged urine, treading wool in vats, whitening with sulfur, persisted for centuries after Rome's fall. Medieval Europe continued using many of the same methods. In some places, fulling mills powered by water wheels replaced human treading, but the basic chemistry remained the same. Urine continued to be collected for use in textile processing well into the 18th century in parts of Europe. True revolution in laundry practices didn't occur until the Industrial Revolution, when mass production made manufactured soap affordable, when piped water became common in homes, when washing machines were invented. Only in the 19th and 20th centuries did laundry transform from intensive manual labor into something that could be accomplished with minimal human effort. For most of human history, including the entire Roman period, laundry was work. Constant, demanding, necessary work. There was no escaping it. And while we modern people might take clean clothes for granted, toss them in a machine, add detergent, press a button, it's worth remembering that for our ancestors, for the vast majority of human history, every clean garment represented hours of human labor. And so we end where we began, with a simple observation. History is not always about dramatic events or famous people. Sometimes history is about the everyday routines that consumed so much of human time and energy. The collection of water, the scrubbing of fabric, the patient work of maintenance and care that kept ancient societies functioning. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through Roman laundry. I hope it has been informative. I hope it has been peaceful. And I hope, perhaps, that it has helped you find rest. Clean clothes tomorrow will be waiting for you. But tonight, you need not worry about them. They will come in their time. Sleep well.